to the Apalachicola Paddle Trip documentary for 2008. This year, the video will be presented in two parts to allow an emphasis on educational content while sharing video and photos of our experiences. The Apalachicola River, largest in the state of Florida, fifth largest in the continental United States, and for over 10,000 years, the main corridor of transportation in southeastern North America. A river whose shores exist with a rich variety of life preserved from the time of the dinosaurs, with flora common to the Appalachian mountain chain, whose waters support nearly 100 species of fish, whose streams and estuaries support the nursery grounds of many marine species. In this two-part series, we invite you to join us on our 8-day paddle trip of adventure, education, and a reconnect with our maritime heritage, and to accept an invitation for the 2009 season to explore this American treasure for yourself. In 2008, the museum improved trip logistics with a specially constructed power catamaran named the Starfish Enterprise. The Starfish provides us a floating platform to support paddlers with a full-service galley, ice maker, marine head with holding tank, gear stowage, and even a hot water heater. She also sports running boards to allow paddlers to pull up, tie off, and exit at water level, and then to take a break to join us for a mid-river luncheon or other relaxation from the rigors of the long paddle stretches. Another notable point is that the museum now has properties at the start and end of the Apalachicola River from which to coordinate logistics. The entire trip is done without any road-based support. The shuttles are provided by center console water boats where kayakers are ferried back to the put-in after a day trip join. In this year, trip logistics were improved by offering all information, including videos from previous trips, at the Maritime Museum website, and a linkage to the River Ecologic web store to allow sign-ups and enrollment in the trips. The trips even include a shuttle running all the way from Atlanta. This year, the trip was also expanded to include a passage across the Bay of Apalachicola for a camp at Little St. George and a sail aboard the Maritime Museum's star exhibit, The Heritage of Apalachicola.
Doing time.
All right. Everybody listening?
All right.
I'm going to do a little lead-in for the main show here. I'm the warm-up preacher, and this is the real McCoy. So I'm going to do a little poem by Robert Service that has a lot of meaning to me, and I often recite at these type of events. And it goes like this. School yourself to savor most things that have but little cost. Prove the best of life is free, sun and stars and sky and sea. Eager in your eyes to please, proffer meadows, brooks and trees. Nature strives for your content, never charging you a cent. Care for dogs and singing birds, have for children cheery words. Find plain food and comfort are more than luxury by far. Music, books, and honest friends, and my honest friends, outweigh golden dividends. Find the truest form of wealth, body fit and ruddy health. Enjoy your work, do it well, scorning not a leisure spell like the paddle of the river down the Apalachicola. Let your smile of happiness, rustic peace, serenely stress. Home to love and heart to pray. Thank your God for every day. And we're going to turn that roll over to Mr. Atkins here. So
let us pray. Gracious and holy, everlasting, eternal Father, as we come now. Yeah.
native striped bass that lives in the Gulf of or along the Gulf of Mexico. Its original range was from the Suwannee River to the Mississippi River. And during the 40s and 50s and 60s, when there were a lot of dams being constructed and a lot of farmland being cleared and a lot of fertilizer and pesticides and what have you being used, almost all of the populations were wiped out except for the one in the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River system. And in man's infinite wisdom, or infant wisdom, or whatever you want to call it, back in the 60s, they just decided to restore these populations using fish from the Atlantic coast. And so fish were brought in and they were stocked in a lot of these rivers, and some of them they survived in, some of them they didn't. They were stocked into the Apalachicola River and the Flint River as well, and some of them did survive. So the population that we have left now is a hybrid with Atlantic coast fish. But it's still a unique fish. It's different than fish found anywhere else in the world. So that's why we feel it's an important fish and one that we want to try to preserve. Now, when you get this far south, you're on the very southern extent of the range of striped bass. And it's a hard life out there on the edge. Striped bass are not a warm water fish. They like cool water, and they have a hard time surviving through the summers down here in the deep south. And so they have to find a cool water refuge to go into to survive through the summertime. And they need that cool water refuge typically from around the end of May until the end of October. And there are a few areas that provide refuge along the upper Apalachicola River. Most of the big areas are up above Jim Woodruff Dam. Now, when you put in a dam like Jim Woodruff Dam or any of the other dams, one of the first things that you get, and it lasts forever, is entrenchment of the river below that dam. The bed of the river drops, the water levels drop, given the same flow. And that's occurred on this river, just like anywhere else. And the river entrenches faster than the refuges do. The refuges typically are creeks or spring runs. Mosquito Creek would be one of them. It's a cool water spring or creek. It stays fairly cool through the summertime. And so the water level in those creeks gets very shallow, especially in the summertime when we have reduced flows, and of course with all the other demands on the system.
Paddle from Blue Spring and pass through Allen Bluffs. It's a beautiful area. It's got this reefs, mountains, reefs on the sides, and it's magnificent.
My name's Mark Ludlow. I'm the biologist for Torrey State Park, which is located in Liberty County, Florida, about 6 miles north of Bristol. Torrey State Park is about approximately 13,000 acres of habitat. We've added a lot of acreage to the park recently. The Sweetwater property and the Aspalaga property have been added, and it stretches for about 6 miles north and south along the east side of the Apalachicola River. The park was established by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s. They moved the historic Gregory Mansion to this site, and the site also had some Confederate era gun pits very close to the Gregory House. So these are some of the reasons that the park was established here back in the 1930s. The park takes its name from the endangered Torrey tree, which is named for 1800s botanist John Torrey, and it has a very unusual distribution. It's found here, found in California, and in Asia, and it's a very ancient type of conifer tree that existed back during the era of the dinosaurs and still exists today. And unfortunately it's becoming very rare, so we're doing some careful management of that species.
Howard, I've been here about 6 years. Every one of these old plantation houses had offices. If you'll notice behind you, you'll see the journals. Came out of North Carolina, got into the turpentine business, and a lot of them got on this river. All right, major lighting sources. That period of time in this area, it chemicals. dip can. And this is a wax, separating wax, two-flow honey wax. Melt that, start dipping the string in it. Got some nice wax.
And we are right here at Bluntstown, and this is the river and floodplain here, and I've got this blow up from this portion of the basin. The Apalachicola is the lowest 10% of the basin. 90% of the basin is upstream of us. The Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint Basin in Georgia is 1/4 of the state of Georgia. So most of the basin is in Georgia. You can't read this, but basically it's the largest river in Florida and the largest forested floodplain, the largest contiguous bottomline hardwood forest in the state, 112,000 acres. And part of what that gives us is a large freshwater fishery. There's 91 species, which is more species than any other river in the state of Florida, and a lot of that has to do with the floodplain. I'm going to tell you some of the diversity of habitat in the floodplain, and that's a big reason why we have such a diverse fish species list. So this is on your handout, and what this is trying to show you is that the river in the main channel, you've been in the main channel this whole time until Sutton's Lake, and it controls the water level in the main channel, controls the water level in the floodplain. So when it's down in the main channel, it's out of the floodplain, or it's very low in some of the sloughs or in the swamps. Actually, what we have now is, because of water level decline, it's down in the channel. It's not in these sloughs and swamps in the fall anymore. So we've had some changes in the relationship between the river and the floodplain, which I'll talk to you about. But of course, you see at the top level that when it's February, March, it's up in the trees. It would be covering all these banks. I don't know if you heard me back there. I said that I kayaked in a flood in the Sutton's Lake area, dropped a tape and weight, and it was 21 feet down to where we were just walking.
We called him Zappa in his youth, and now Einstein in his old age.
That makes me Frankenstein.
Frankenstein. So anyhow, I first met Steve many years ago. I guess it was about 30 or thereabouts, when I came down with a bunch of my cronies from school, Florida State, and to help my father frame out his house. And there was Steve. He had volunteered to come down for the weekend and provide expertise on his technique, since he had built his own house. And so we all met that day, and that began a long circuitous route where we keep bumping into each other, and here we are on the sandbar bumping into each other again. And Steve's always been an inspiration to me, and I think his wisdom on the water flows and the issues that are in front of us are something we can carry back and tell others, you know, as we argue the case for preserving this great wilderness. So Steve, take it away.
So I'm Steve Lightman, and I've been involved with Apalachicola River issues for over 30 years. And so I think one of the first things is education. A second thing that I think we need to think about is how to shift the power balance. Because during the ACF negotiations, a lot of the fight was put as Georgia versus Florida. And that is not accurate at all. In fact, what it is that the Atlanta interests pretty much kidnapped the Georgia position and called it, you know, Atlanta position became the Georgia position. And there's many people in Georgia whose interests align much better with what we want down here than what Atlanta wants. And they're as much a victim of this as we are. And, you know, we're talking, you know, everything from industrial people below Atlanta to, you know, the power company, some of the power company stuff. There's a lot of people in Georgia that are unhappy. And so the interesting thing is that how do we get them to work with us better is the challenge. And my first try at it was that I worked with the Mid-Chattahoochee people, and I told them that what we have coming up is a water control plan. And the water control plan is the manual for how you regulate the reservoirs in the ACF basin. And this is going to be a highly technical thing, and one of the things that when I teach the class that I like to point out is we have a little paradox going on is that you want citizens to be involved with decision making, but the more complex the decisions, the less the capacity of citizens to comment on it or to be meaningfully involved in it. So you get people that want to be involved, but you have to take the time to teach them about things and understand things, or they're completely incapable. And when you get to a 20,000 square river basin with reservoirs, management, uses, and a lot of things happening, it's not easy. There's a lot of complexity to it, and so that we need to figure out how to get people to understand better. So I tried working with the Mid-Chattahoochee people and told them that instead of reacting, why don't they proact, and we'd put together what we want for a water control plan and send it to the Corps. And incidentally, the Corps would be thrilled if someone did that. The first reaction would be that they wouldn't like it, but put yourself in the position of if you're working for a federal agency and you're doing that. But in trying to do this, I made a little mistake in that I sent a letter to Georgia's governor.
Oh, that was a big mistake.
Which started with people that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And, and 2 days later, my contract got terminated. Dredging and navigation has been a real problem for the river, because when you're putting down these disposal sites like this, you're burying habitat. The river makes natural sandbars. Sandbars are a natural feature of the river. And what we were trying to do with the dredging at one time was to see if we can get them to mimic riverine processes. But the problem with mimicking is if you're trying to provide the full channel all year long, the volume you have, you might mimic it, but the volumes are just way out of line, you know. And so instead of putting down a couple thousand cubic yards here and there, they start putting down 10,000 or 100,000, and the river doesn't do that. And you end up just burying things and changing things and forcing, you know, erosion and a lot of things happening with the river. And historically, the navigation people wanted to have a 9 by 100 foot channel year-round. And the trick with barges is that barges, where the expense in barges come from is when they're loading and offloading. And so the idea of having small barges where you take them down the Gulf Intercoastal, reload them and unload them, makes things so expensive it doesn't work. And so where we needed to get to is a place with the navigation people where their expectations were consistent with what the river could do, instead of expecting, you know, a highway system from the river. And as a result of the many years of battling and all that, for the past 5 years, this river has not been dredged. And consequently, there's been almost no shipping. And consequently, the navigation people are starting to have a whole new vision that if we could get any traffic on the river, we would be happy. We don't want to have it year-round. And to back up a little, is where they got in trouble on this river is that in the 30s, when they designed the navigation channel, they had about 10 or 15 years of flow data. And they said, you want to provide a river 95% of the time. What flow was available 95% of the time? It was 9,300. So they said the design flow for providing a 9-foot channel is 9,300 cubic feet per second. Well, as luck would have it, that was a wet period. And that was very misleading. And in fact, now if you look at the flow record, the flow that's available 95% of the time is about 7,800, not 9,300. So there's less water than they expected. And after all the dredging, after putting in dike fields, after doing rock removal and doing everything that they've done to the river, it takes about 15,000 cubic feet per second to provide a 9-foot channel. So the navigation people got the double whammy of it takes more water than they thought to provide the channel, with less water being available than they thought. And so there was no way in God's earth that they're going to provide a year-round channel. And they finally have grown to accept that. So where we stand today is that, and the interesting question I think that's out there, and who knows what the answer is that would it be a good trade to say, okay, navigation people and Georgia people, we will work with you and try to provide a seasonal channel and get more water, especially in the spring during spawning season, and in exchange we would allow limited work to help you provide a channel. And so that, and in trade, what we're getting is a lot more water and more flow for the ecosystem. And so it's a trading, you know, you're dealing with the devil at some level, but you're saying is are we getting a lot more good dealing with the devil and dealing with reality than we are being purists and saying no dredging, period? And it's a difficult question, and it's not saying dredging's good, but it's saying is that it's a question that really needs to be explored and asked is that do we get more back going this way? Not only environmentally could it be better, but you could also seriously change the whole shifting of power in what's going on in these ACF negotiations if you can bring in actively involving people from central Georgia and having them work with us.
Would that allow them to deposit spoil in the floodplain?
It could allow some disposal on areas like this. Or you could look at it as they'd be making camping areas, maintenance in camping areas.
How do you tell the difference between a disposal site such as this and a natural sandbar?
By size. That's a great question, Neva. And when I worked for environmental regulation for about 4 years, I worked on looking at dredging, looking at impacts of dredging, and there was a lot of people in permitting that were saying that dredging kills rivers and everything. And so I went out with a couple people that work with me, and we went down the Apalachicola River, which has never been dredged, and took pictures of all the natural sandbars and did a slideshow for the people in the dredge and fill section and asked them what they thought. And they were screaming how bad it was and who was doing this and all that. And when we pointed out to them, this is on a river that's never been dredged. And
Trick question.
it was, yeah, I can be nasty like that.
Shame on you.
Yeah. Oh, they were not too happy. But their boss thought it was cute. He thought it was a great idea. But the point being is that it is really hard to tell the difference. But I think it has to do with magnitude and size and all. The river moves a lot of material, and during floods it builds sandbars, and that's a natural thing. This is an alluvial river. There's a lot of sand coming down the river. And I think the problem is about magnitude, is that, you know, if you go and put 100,000 cubic yards here, it is not a good thing. But what volume can you put here that's sustainable? How much can we get away with actually doing where you could minimize the environmental effects? And what you're dredging is, you need a predictable channel. Is, mind you, the bottom of this river is sand. This is what it is. This is not primo habitat. This is not where the fish are. Where the fish are is in the back areas. And so you would not want to do anything in a manner that would allow material to be so high or so great that it gets washed back into the floodplain, or that it goes into sluways. And you don't want to be blocking sluways. But the question that needs to be asked, I think, is there ways to do this that we can provide some navigation on a seasonal basis that fits what the river can do without having much environmental harm and providing leverage to get more water?
All right. Neil Land and Timber started down here. I'll give you a brief history. In 1918, the initial land acquisition took place, and in 1923 they began making box veneer, which is the wooden slats that you see in the old orange crates, the wooden crates. And that business continued and thrived till the mid to late 60s. A lot of them were educated on the GI Bill, and a lot of them went into forestry, and a lot of them were real smart people. And the paper companies coming south and put a lot of emphasis on pine research and in later years hardwood research. And then about the mid-80s, the paper companies didn't see the need to own land anymore, so they began to divest themselves of their land holdings and sell them to other entities, because their theory was, well, what else are they going to do with it? And you know, to some extent they were right. I think it was kind of short-sighted, but that, you know, that was what their thinking was at the time, that the resource was out there, and whether they owned it or not, it would always be there. Well, that's not necessarily so, because the private individual may or may not elect to replant a pine forest or to take the necessary steps to grow a hardwood forest.
Because of the spoil. And it's hard for anybody to imagine the amount of dredge spoil that's in the river and where it came from. But when y'all come down the river and you see you got a dike field over on that side, well, that's eating the bank on the other side.
That's those poles y'all were asking about. Those poles that are out in the water, they're dike fields.
Yeah, and that they put them in there to constrict the water and make the flow go to where it would deepen the river for the barge traffic. And then they started using the within bank disposal sites for the same purpose. And you got 135 disposal sites within banks on the river. You got 26 dike fields and 3 open water disposal sites. The swamp was already dried up terrible, and the otter came to the river, and they hadn't been around people. They weren't around people because very few people go way back in the swamp. It's too easy to ride up and down the river and say you know the system. Right. And they weren't used to people, and they would swim up and down the river right off the bank, and you could just ride up beside them and they wouldn't even go under the water. Well, there's roguish people that would just ride around and shoot them and shoot the alligators. Those areas are they're gone. A whole world of things that's gone. And when you get way on down the river, the swamp down there is, you can just go from here to that boat right yonder, and it's like another world. It's just everywhere you look, there's wonder, you know.
Well, talk about the crawfish a little bit, and the eel and
the crawfish.
What y'all used to do.
The crawfish, we used to commercial catch the crawfish because they in the spring, you know, they'd come out of the water in the like in the December, they'd come up and the water would come up, and the females would have piles of babies hanging on. They got like a little feathery hair like on their stomachs, and there'd be all these tiny crawfish, you know, and when the water gets on up and she comes up, she'll flick them off, and they grow, and then when they get big enough to catch in the basket, you know, we'd catch them. That would be billions of them.
When she lays the down, a child of she lying in a southern